Yeah.
Anyway, just want to introduce you. This is Ana Isabel, and she is an astrologer and hypnotherapist. And I put her bio in the email that I sent to everybody, so I don't have it memorized. I just got back from the doctor's office. Anyway, introduce yourself.
Well, so yes, as Rebecca has said, I am a psychological astrologer as well as an analytical hypnotherapist, and I do a lot of work with all sorts of issues, from addiction to compulsive behavior to depression, anxiety. That's my that's what I do.
Well, awesome. Well, today we're going to talk about Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto and how they happen to be involved in our relationships when we have them in aspect to our Venus, to our in our seventh house as the ruler of our seventh house, and how difficult those are. And do you want to go first, or do you want me to say something real quick on how I got into all this?
Well, tell us, how did you get into all of this, Rebecca?
I actually had Pluto going back and forth over my Venus for 5 years when I was 30. And it did times, a transit of my Venus 5 times. And I left my husband for the same person twice in the same 5 year period. And I have Aquarius on the seventh, and so he had 5 planets in Aquarius. As I said in the previous video that we did, the universe was begging me to see that Aquarius side of me. And Pluto was making me, the relationship I was in was making it completely die, be over, so I could start over. And it was the best thing in the world that ever happened to me because we were not happy. I was not compatible with who I was with. We couldn't communicate, and communication is everything to me with 5 planets in the third house. So I started studying astrology from that point on because I went to see an astrologer and he knew details about me that only I knew. And I was like, how did he do that? And I was getting a divorce. My son was only one, and I had a lot of nights to be alone. So I studied and studied and studied till 3 in the morning. I read astrology books out the kazoo and took classes while my ex-husband babysat for me every week while I went and took classes. And believe it or not, it was at John Gray's mother. John Gray is the one who wrote Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. His mother had a bookstore in the Rice Village area in the 80s. And I took classes there with Kim McSherry, who is the diva of astrology classes here in Houston. She is the crone, let's put it that way. She is a crone and of wisdom and knowledge and very deep Scorpio and very, very good teacher. And so I took classes with her for 5 years and then just started going to every single place I could to learn more about relationships. So that's my story. So how about you? How did you get into all of this and how I know you have Neptune ruling the seventh, so
Yeah. Well, I think that I it wasn't a transit like that got me into astrology. But I think my interest started when I was a child, even though I didn't know that's what my interest was. So I started to collect myths, and I started to collect folk tales from all over the world when I was a child. And by the time I was maybe about 14, 15, I had realized that there were themes that prevailed or were prevalent in stories that from different parts of the world. So, there were creation myths, there were, all sorts of specific things, and there were characters that cropped up in different stories under different guises. So I started to piece that together, and I think I was maybe about 16, 15, 16 when I discovered Jung. And I
mm,
thought, oh, there's an actual thing. I'm not imagining it. They're called archetypes. And
mhm.
so that was that. And then I got into university and I started to study psychology. And while I was there, I met my partner who was interested in astrology. And here it was, my two interests brought together under one umbrella. So that was the thing. Now, funnily enough, though, you said I said, oh, it wasn't, I wasn't going through any, difficult transits or anything. The funny thing is, actually, come to think of it, I was, because I met my partner when Pluto was opposing Venus.
Oh.
So that's very interesting because I hadn't thought about that. But yes, I was going through a Pluto opposition to Venus, which is in my ninth house.
Mhm.
And the other thing is that not only did he bring me astrology, he was also not Canadian, and I lived in Canada, and that's how I've ended up here in Cornwall today, because he's English, and he brought me to England. So that was a Pluto Venus opposition, and that's when I discovered astrology. How ninth house is that? Venus being
Yeah.
in the ninth, from somebody from abroad.
Right.
So
It's remarkable.
yeah, I'd not thought of that until you mentioned your Pluto opposition. I was also going through a Jupiter conjunction to my Venus at the same
Mhm.
time.
So that's very
Yeah,
telling.
yeah,
Jupiter, foreigner,
yeah,
Pluto.
yeah. And that was so that was beginning of my interest in astrology. And I think, well, just never looked back really.
So let's talk about the archetypes themselves a little bit.
Yeah, well, as we were talking about Pluto, we might as well stick with him, hadn't we?
Yeah,
Um,
it's fine.
who wants to upset Pluto after all? Um, so yes, god of the underworld. And I think for me, the when we're talking about relationships, and we're talking about Pluto, we have to consider the myth of Persephone, because Pluto kidnaps Persephone. At least that's the official story. The official story, the headline is he kidnaps Persephone and takes her into the underworld. And her mother, Demeter, is very angry and distressed, looking for her. Goes to Zeus, says, I hear Pluto, Hades has my daughter. Do something. Zeus says, sorry, underworld, nothing I can do. She says, do something. Zeus says, sorry, underworld, nothing I can do. She says, right then. Off she goes. And so everything begins to die. And after a while, Zeus thinks, uh-oh, better do something. So he has a chat with Hades. Hades says, too bad. After all, god of death, he's not bothered about death, is he? But Zeus is. So he drags Hades to a kind of the negotiating table with Demeter. And the two of them are not coming to an agreement. So Zeus has to intercede. And he says, well, if she hasn't eaten anything whilst during her stay in the underworld, she can go. So Hades says, fine by me. And so the pomegranate seed, this is where the pomegranate seed comes in, because it is discovered that Persephone has indeed had one pomegranate seed. And Zeus says, well, a pomegranate seed does not make a pomegranate. On the other hand, it's a pomegranate seed. So he says that 6 months with mum above ground, 6 months with 6 months with Hades underground. And that's the very short version of a very complex myth. And the complexity is this. Now, it happens that we are all women here today. And I don't know what you were like at 15 and 16, but I liked a little bit of male attention at that point. And the reason that we have laws protecting minors from adults is because at 15 and 16, many girls like a little bit of male attention. it's flattering. And consequently, they are vulnerable to what we would now call grooming. They're not children, but they're not adults either. And it's easy to take advantage of them. So I think I'm bringing that in because this is a question of personal responsibility here. And we don't know exactly how old Persephone was, but we know she was a maid, which means she would have been around that age and not particularly experienced. And we assume she was kidnapped, but she might not have been exactly kidnapped. She may have been seduced. That's not the same as kidnapping. And I think that this is a very important line here because this is that innocence that we have. And as I say, it's why we have laws protecting minors from having relationships with adults, because there is that innocence there that means they can do things that are not in their own best interest. It means that they can fall into temptation. And I'm just thinking about, the Pinocchio story. I don't know if you remember the Pinocchio story. And I remember when I first came across the story, I found it very distressing. And I found it distressing because Pinocchio, this wooden boy, was so easily lured away from his home by the temptations of the world. And that really is what we are like. And then we get into adolescence, and anyone who's a parent or who's dealt with teenagers knows how hard it is to protect them from themselves, because they know everything. They are supremely arrogant at that age, and they will not be told anything. And so they can get themselves into all sorts of trouble. And I think it's really important to look at that side of this myth more closely, because we only ever see it from Demeter's point of view. And this is the mother who's protecting her child and possibly not engaging or not wishing to understand that her child is now a sexual being. And consequently, she's going to get tempted. Many girls of that age are attracted to older boys, not necessarily men, but boys. And many of them do not like boys their age. They consider them to be immature. And actually, in all probability, they are, because we know that girls mature more quickly than boys. And there could be an evolutionary thing going on here where girls are looking for figures who are going to be protecting them. So there's been a number of studies that have shown that girls, for example, begin to menstruate earlier if they don't have a strong father presence. And it's postulated that the reason is they're looking for a male protector. They haven't got their father, they're looking for that male protector. So there's so much. Yeah, I find that absolutely fascinating. And there's so much here. So when we're looking at this myth, it's really important that we realize, yeah, Pluto's not exactly coming off clean here. But this is also a story about the loss of innocence.
Yes.
And I think, and it's the loss, and it's how the innocence is lost. In all probability, what we have here is a young girl who's flattered and seduced and gets in over her head and can't get out. And so when we have those encounters with Pluto, that's what we're doing. We are losing something, something's dying inside of us.
And I believe that happens to men too. So it's the same.
Absolutely.
It works both ways.
Totally. Sorry, I should have made that clear. I'm speaking in terms of, because I'm looking at the myth and how it is.
Sure.
But absolutely, because the thing about Pluto is that there's no bargaining, there's no negotiation. So Zeus, in a way, I mean, it's his brother, and he knows there's, where Hades is concerned, there's no negotiation. Hades has his helmet of invisibility when he comes into our world. You don't see him.
Mm-hmm.
So what did Persephone see? Who knows what she saw? Could she have seen him fully? She couldn't have seen him fully. So she possibly saw what she wanted to see,
which we all do,
which we often do, and I think there is no negotiation because the reality can be very, very different. And being dragged into the underworld when you are a child of light can't be a picnic. On the other hand, what pleasures and delights did she find there? Who knows? Maybe it was power that seduced her.
Mm-hmm.
The feeling of power, coming into her power as a woman, So there's all these different layers. And when we get to that myth, when we get to the bottom of that myth, those are the questions that we need to be asking about those relationships where Pluto is involved. So if you have Pluto in the chart, how many times have you met Hades in your life? And what form has he taken? If Pluto, depending on Pluto, if you've got Pluto in touch with Venus or ruling or connected with the seventh house in any way, how many times have you met Hades? And you will meet Hades in relationships that are abusive, for instance. You will meet Hades where you feel you have no agency,
mm-hmm.
no power.
Right.
But you will also meet Hades when you are the one manipulating and you are the one controlling, because you are afraid that if you're not, somebody's going to do that to you. And so it's the whole spectrum of abuse and abuser. We can be all of those things. And where do we fall on that spectrum? If we are constantly attracted to people who are powerful, it may well be that we're attracted to them because we wish we had power. We admire power. We like power.
Mm-hmm. And our dreams will show that.
Our dreams will show that.
Our dreams will start showing us that.
That fantasy. So this is the thing, is that you have that desire to be powerful, but you don't own it in yourself. So you seek it by being around other people. And it's so much healthier if you recognize that, because then you can take that power for yourself. And hopefully when you do that in a conscious way, you're not going to abuse it. So right. This is it's one of those things that it's very difficult. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Harry Potter story and Harry Potter books, but at the end, the very last thing that Harry does is he destroys a wand of power.
Mm.
He comes to realize that all of the horror that people have experienced has been because power hungry people just want more power.
Right.
And so it's been all about this wand, which actually he's discovered belongs to him. It's part of his inheritance.
Mm-hmm.
But he chooses to destroy it because he knows his limits. He's had moments where he's descended into wanting revenge. Mm-hmm. He's had moments in which he's wanted to make people suffer. And he knows that dark side of himself. And he says, right, no, I'm not doing this. And nobody's doing this as long as I have any say in it. So he destroys the wand. Mm-hmm. Lord of the Rings, the Ring of Power. None of the wise want that ring. None of them. Their mission is to help Frodo, who is an innocent and does not wish to have the power for himself, take it to the cracks of doom and destroy it. Really important that. But that can only happen if we understand the potential for darkness within ourselves. There's an amazing scene in the book. I can't even remember whether it's in the film or not, but in the book, he gives it to Galadriel, who is the wisest of elves. He says, I can't deal with this. This is too much for me. You take it, lady. And she looks at it, and then he sees what she could be if she has the ring of power, and she's changed into a beautiful but what's the word I want? Deadly energy, really, that comes from her. And she grows in size, and she says, yes, I can take the ring, and I will be Galadriel, the Great, or whatever the words are she uses. And under me, there will be no evil, and I will rule and reign. And then she laughs and says, no, no. Because she recognizes that power corrupts, and it corrupts absolutely. Mm-hmm. And she knows better than to accept that ring. So she laughs and she says, no, I'll stay Galadriel and I will fade. I will fade into the west, she says. I'll be simple Galadriel and I will fade away. And that is the choice she makes. So these are the reason these archetypes are so huge is because we have to understand them, because we have to understand that power can corrupt others and us. So when we meet Pluto in relationships, this is exactly the stuff that we're having to deal with. It's that, who holds the power? How do I hold power fairly? How do I stop myself from being corrupted? What corrupts us to make us want to control another person? And equally, what's stopping me from exercising my power and protecting myself when someone's abusing me? Why am I allowing this to happen? Because this is a form of sadism. And why am I being a masochist here and allowing myself to be destroyed?
So the most important thing in everything you said was taking back your dark side.
Totally.
Because when you recognize that that's in you and that you also are like that, then you can be fair.
Exactly.
because we
There's I Professor Jordan Peterson, um, he did an amazing series on the Old Testament. And there was, I can't remember now the context, but he was talking about how it's possible for anyone to sadistically brutalize another human being. And he was saying, well, you know, the thing is, we all know everybody's weaknesses because they're the same as ours. And because we know our own vulnerabilities, we know what to do to make somebody else suffer. It's very easy. And he said the most dangerous person is the person who thinks that they are incapable of evil.
Right.
Because if you believe you are incapable of evil, you are much more likely to engage in evil.
Exactly.
You are.
I mean, that's Jungian psychology 101, you know.
Exactly. And he put it, very, very bluntly and very, very simply. We have to be aware that we have as much potential for evil as we have for good. And I know that evil is not a very fashionable word. People like to pretend that evil does not exist, but history would actually beg to differ. Because if we don't call out the evil that we have seen happening historically, we are doomed to meet it again. And hey, just look around, folks. It's not gone away. Yeah. So I think that's a really important part of the Pluto experience, because when we meet Pluto, that's that loss of innocence, the belief that you can play with fire and get away with it.
Right.
You
And
know?
also the stand that people take, that it's us against them.
Mm.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's my take on Pluto. Do you want me to talk about Neptune and Uranus as well?
Sure. But let's make them a little briefer, because we kind of lost 15 minutes. So
Sorry.
that's all right.
So with Neptune, I think this is about illusion and disillusion. These are the big themes. And you only get disillusioned. Again, it's a kind of loss of innocence, again, but it's
All
the
three of the, can I say something real quick? All
yeah,
three, all three of the outer planets involve the loss of innocence, because you
yeah,
have to raise your consciousness to a higher level to incorporate those energies. And they are
yes,
not easy, because the age of Pisces, we were all victims, right? But as we get out of that victim consciousness, all three of those outer planets inside of us need a voice and a place to be. So go ahead.
and I think we can actually play with the definition of innocence versus naivety. I
Right.
think that we can say innocence up to a point, but when we're doing it as adults, now this is naivety, and that's blind willfulness, or willful blindness, I think is probably the better way to put it. And I think that is the realm of Neptune, is willful blindness.
Victim consciousness.
I want to believe this. And when you fail,
Excellent.
when you fail to live up to being my savior, my hero, my
Rescuer.
my rescuer, my guru,
Or my ideal fantasy.
my fantasy, I am so disillusioned. And people talk about Pluto being very unforgiving, and Pluto people being extremely unforgiving. I can tell you that I find Neptunians to be totally unforgiving. More so, actually, than Pluto people. Because the thing about Pluto people is that if they can forgive because they can admit things within themselves. They don't play the denial game quite in the same way as Neptune people.
They do it first.
Yeah.
I'd like to just remark that probably ages, 20 all the way up to about 40. After 40, you're now an adult. I mean, you are an adult. You've had your Saturn return. It is time for you to recognize and be responsible for what you're attracting. But not everybody can do it.
No. And I think this is the Neptune is a tricky customer because he is so elusive. And he would indulge in and I don't mean the mythological picture here, but the archetype of Neptune, the archetypal Neptunian is going to be very difficult to pin down, which means that taking personal responsibility is extremely difficult because of the desire to escape from reality. So this is the it's your fault, not my fault. It's you did this to me. I was with a client this morning who said to me, her sister is driving her crazy because anything anybody says, you are hurting me. Are you happy? It's that's Neptune. And that's where I say it's totally unforgiving because it's either the ideal or nothing at all. And I think maybe this is where the buck stops with Pluto or Hades, because Hades is the underworld and he's looking at you and you can't do any of that stuff. He knows what your intentions were. He knows exactly what's been in your heart. So when you say you didn't know any better, he's going to look at you and go, really? There's no lying to him. So the buck does stop there. But with Neptune, that energy, however beautiful and sublime it can be, when it comes to relationships, where it gets messy is that thing. There was I don't know if any of you watched it, but there was an American sitcom called Dream On in the 90s. I think it went out on HBO, and it was hilarious. But it featured a couple where she is completely besotted with him, and he is portrayed like a god. The Pope knows him. Everybody, he saves the life of the Pope. He saves the life of, he's always in Africa rescuing children. He's doing this, and there's no time for her at all. But he's always got a really good excuse because, hey, he belongs to the world. And as she says at one point, and I'm just this plain woman, and who looks good in navy. That's what she says. That's what meanwhile, she's a really eminent psychologist, but she sees herself. That's the Neptune in the seventh. He's sitting there and she's put him on this extraordinary pedestal. Admittedly, the entire world seems to have Richard Stone on a pedestal. But the point is, she doesn't have the guts to say, yeah, but he's got no time for me. This relationship is a sham because he's never here. That's it. When he's there, it's the grand romantic gestures, flying on Concorde from New York to Paris on her birthday. Occasionally that happens, but it's not every day. Every day, the man who's with her is her ex-husband. Who's there whenever she's in trouble and needs anybody. It's her best friend. So this is the Neptune in the seventh, the illusion, the disillusion.
But don't you find, I heard Richard Eidemann say this once, and I not only experienced it, but heard it from all of my clients, that when we have Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto in aspect to our Venus, we only want part of a relationship. We don't want the whole relationship. We don't want the two-car garage and the kids and the PTA meetings. We want only half of that, and we want our freedom to a large degree.
And I think that that brings us to Uranus, because I think Uranus is that. I think Neptune is the let's go and live on a desert island and be one and meet God while we're on this desert island. It's that fantasy, you know, and the romance, and it's you into me, me into you. And it's just this, it can be incredibly narcissistic when you look at it like that. But with, and by the way, I actually do feel that we can really be dealing with narcissists with Neptune in relationships, because the whole thing is we can end up being the sacrifice. We sacrifice ourselves for the sake of, because we don't want to upset them, and they're so vulnerable, and we're so busy trying to save them and rescue them. And actually what we're doing, if we're not careful, is enabling. But hey, you know, and so there's a very narcissistic streak that could run through Neptunian relationships. So, but when you were talking about freedom, that brings me to Uranus, because Uranus is so detached.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Neptune wants fusion.
Merge and fusion.
It's the merging, it's the fusion. Uranus doesn't. Uranus.
But Neptune only wants
Uranus
that
is
in their imagination.
Oh, well, it's, yeah, exactly. But with Uranus, it's the marriage is to the ideal, and it's a different kind of ideal to the Neptune ideal. It's it's a much more intellectual ideal, if I can put it that way. It's an idea. It's the marriage to the idea, and the beauty of what the ideal would be. And I actually, it's a great a great way to think of it is exactly that. That, think about Uranus. He rejected his own children. He pushed them back into the bowels of the earth. Why? Because they were not his picture of perfection. Mm-hmm. They were of the earth, Gaia. Mm-hmm. Clumsy giants, you know, multi-headed, you know, all of, and none of them were what he wanted as children. So he pushed them back. And I think that Uranus is like that. It's that idea of what a relationship is. And a relationship for Uranus is a meeting of minds.
Yes.
It's a meeting of minds, and there's actually no room for discussion. There's no room for difference. Your mind has to match my mind. And this is where Uranus can be very tyrannical as well, because it's dogma. You know, when we're talking about what's in here, that's dogma. If you're not allowing anybody else to have different thoughts to yours, that's dogma. And you can preach.
And again, I have to interject that all of that, which is the dark side of those energies.
Yeah.
The light side of those energies is that you actually embrace that they're different from you, that you're going to learn something completely different, that you're their friend instead of just their lover. Yeah. And that you're allowing freedom and real communication, like between friends, where they actually can be a completely different person with different friends and different ideas and different things to do. And you allow each other to be. And to me, that is a friendship. So I see the planets as they each have their faults and their dark side, and then they have their positive side as well. You know, maybe it's Moon and Sag, but I have to throw in that you can actually
and that's
together.
And that's absolutely true. But when we're talking about the shadow, we're talking about the shadow.
The dark side of it. Yeah.
Exactly. And so here, when we're looking at that dark side of Uranus, this is the dark side of Uranus.
Yes.
And when you're talking about that need for freedom in relationships, I'll always remember when in my early days practicing professionally, I went to a psychic fair and I was doing readings for different people, funnily enough, here in Cornwall. And there was a woman who came through, Uranus in the seventh, and she said, I feel terrible. I said, why? And she said, well, see, my husband's in the Navy and it's fantastic. But now he's due to be coming home and staying. He's going to be staying home. And I'm supposed to be really happy about it, but I'm not. So we needed to have a discussion about Uranus in the seventh and the need for freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and that was it. She loved the fact that she was a part-time wife.
Mm-hmm.
That's what she was. She was a part-time wife. And it wasn't that she was unfaithful or anything. It's just that she was a part-time wife. And that was what she liked about the relationship. She had the perfect marriage. She could be.
There has to be space between when you have Uranus involved. There has to be space and time apart. That is necessary.
And
It
so
is
that was.
absolutely necessary.
And so you can imagine how the discussion went. But then, you know, there are people who with Uranus in the seventh who come to me and say, I can never find a man who will commit. And I say,
That was me. That was me for years until I saw myself.
and I, newsflash, it might be you who doesn't want to commit. And, you know, and I always say, how clever of you to go and find men who don't want to commit so you don't have to.
Yes.
You know, how very clever of your unconscious. It's keeping you safe from falling into feeling trapped. So that's a whole, you know, then a whole different discussion. And but it is that thing of a meeting of minds.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have that meeting of minds and you are able to connect and be free and allow for some difference between the minds, great. But if you want a meeting of minds and basically you want a mind that's just like yours, then that's a whole other side of Uranus, which is not very pleasant as well. So these are the pitfalls, I think, for each of the
planets. Mm-hmm.
planets, and we need to recognize those energies within us so that we understand our urges, our desires. Because here's the other thing. See, I'm looking for a property at the moment because we're looking to move here to Cornwall. And it's so easy to fall in love. You know, you see a house and it's really good, and then you get to know all about the damp, and you get to know about the expense that it's going to take to put it right, and you get to learn about, you know, whether this is a good neighborhood or not. So the question becomes, is this a good house for me? In order to be happy in the purchase, we have to go from the isn't it beautiful to is it right? And I think that this is the problem we have with relationships, particularly when Venus is afflicted or when we have the seventh house with these heavy energies, is that we have to go beyond that initial falling in love and start to be able to begin to distinguish between transference of our desire and the desperate need to have that desire fulfilled, to asking, to what extent is desire leading me up a path that is not real? You know, to what extent am I seeing things that are not there, or the classic Neptune one, to see the potential. I see the
Exactly.
potential.
Yes.
I see the potential, and yeah, but the potential is not the reality right now. That's the, or with Pluto, the paranoid, you know, he might do that. Oh, he reminds me of this, and it might do that. Maybe you need to grab hold of all the previous pain and do some work on that, so that you're not tarnishing everybody with that brush
Yes.
10 minutes after you meet them. That's called paranoia. you know so yeah, I think that's I I think I can't add
That
any more to that.
you've done a great job. I mean, those three are very difficult. And the illusion is that it's going to be like in fairy tales, and you see two people getting married, and you know that they have a marriage made in heaven, right, according to them, and their Facebook looks so fabulous, and they're so happy. And then you know Saturn is about to go through the marriage house. When you look at the two charts and you go, that marriage made in heaven, as Liz Green said, is going to change. And everybody changes after you sign on that dotted line, because now you're being real. Now you're not the ideal, you're being real, and they get to see your backside and your dark side and your complexes when you enter into a complex, and they start seeing all the different disparate parts of you that were not present in the romance part. And when you can get through that, see each other's dark side, have each other's back, and keep going, you can get to the gold, which is an open heart and a love for a real human being. Because otherwise, you're still looking for that mirror out there, which is only in your imagination and your unconscious. So I teach people, if you can get through the shadow, then you can get to the good. Otherwise, you have to start all over again. You have to start all over again with another person. And every one of us can probably say, if only I had known then what I know now, and probably wouldn't have entered the first relationship because there was really nothing there. You had nothing in common with that person, or you were projecting some ideal fantasy that didn't exist. And when you have all three of the outer planets involved with your Venus or Neptune, you're not going to have the typical Barbie and Ken, Mars and Venus relationship. It's just not going to happen. You do need a meeting of minds. You do need a spiritual experience, and you definitely need to share power. So all three of them have to be implemented within that one relationship. And you have to have yourself. You have to have your own center, your own place to shine and do what you love to do, and not revolve yourself around another person. And so it's a tricky business to have those three planets there, and it's very, very painful when we're young. When we're young, we don't understand what's going on because, like you said, we keep finding people who won't commit, and we're like, why do I keep finding people who won't commit? And then life experience starts showing you, you didn't want to commit to that one, and you didn't want to commit to that one, and there was something just not perfect about them, just like you said, right? Because there's no perfect person, and you just kind of keep doing that until you recognize, okay, this is me. This is me. This is my pattern. My need to survive in a relationship is not to be merged body, heart, mind and soul. I need space, and I need my freedom, and I need an intellectual equal, and then I need a spiritual partner, and I need all these different things, but I'm not necessarily going to find them in one person. And so therefore the friendship element of relationship comes in, and our friendships have been a real important part of us learning how to love ourselves. And I really believe as we move into the age of Aquarius that our friendships are extremely valuable to us because they see everything about us. But probably the most important thing is we tell each other the truth. We tell each other the uncensored truth. And we don't have to worry they're not going to love us by telling them the truth. And so to me, the new paradigm of relating in the age of Aquarius is to be honest. You know, this is who I am, and this is what I need. Be willing to share your needs. Be willing to say what you don't like about the other person without feeling you're going to offend them. And then meeting each other halfway. I'm a Libra. It's about meeting each other halfway, you know, negotiating, collaborating, cooperating, and getting through the shadow so that you can get to the better part, because there's a much better part. I've been teaching a 6-week course, and my students are like, let's keep going. And so I'm going to start teaching the second 6 weeks course in January so that the first group can start doing this the next 6 weeks. And I'm excited about that because relationships are something everybody needs help with. Relationships are super important to our lives. I really appreciate you being with me today, and you really did a great job in how you took that myth of Pluto and explained that. I had not heard the part. I've read that myth many, many times, but somehow it never registered that there was an element of seduction, that she wanted to be in the right.
Yeah, it's not something that we think about very often. But what made me think about it is dealing with adults who were sexually abused as children, or I'm going to put it a different way, as adolescents, actually. But the abuse was extremely subtle, and you would say it was grooming. And what I've come to realize is that the way in which that was handled by people who then found out was as damaging as the actual person who started it in the first place, because the adolescent has formed an emotional connection with the abuser.
Yes.
And the abuser, at some point, makes them feel special and loved.
Mm-hmm.
And they're usually vulnerable and seeking that, although not seeking abuse in that way. It's more a case of they crave being noticed, they crave being loved because they're not getting that, and somebody here is paying them attention, and then they are punished for giving them that attention, and they themselves feel punished and dirty,
Right.
for being in the relationship in the first place. So it's complete split and trauma, because on the one hand, they feel like it's their fault, that they did something, and so they feel it all of those feelings of being bad, etc., are massive, the blowing of trust, all of that. But at the same time, they are also getting the message that it was wrong for somebody to pay attention to them, and it was wrong for somebody to love them. So we have to understand this, because otherwise, when we step in with heavy boots to end it, to protect the adolescent, which we will call a child, we can inadvertently be adding to the harm that was done. And that it requires a delicacy that's missing, because by and large, we react to protect, and we're not understanding exactly the sensibilities of what we're doing. And if I had not heard this being expressed by people who've been in that position, it would never have occurred to me. And that's what's made me look at that myth in a different way.
It was very enlightening. So thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much, Rebecca, for doing this. It's lovely. Thank you.
It's been very interesting. So thank you so much for joining us, Layla and Susan. And we will end today, and maybe we'll do this again.
Who knows? Yeah, that would be lovely. Thank you.
Love to.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.